everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is journalist and writer Mike Ayers. Mike's new book, Sharing in the Groove, The Untold Story of the 90s Jamband Explosion, covers exactly that. It's an oral history of how a new scene and a new community developed, grew, and thrived from the late 80s into the turn of the century. I read it in about 2.5 days, and if you have any interest at all about the roots of our current jam band scene, it is a must-read. If you'll allow me to sound both nerdy and pretentious at the same time, I do consider myself a student of history. I am fascinated by how customs, cultures, and patterns develop over time, whether or not we're aware of them at the time. I love looking back or listening to others, obviously, primary sources, look back and tell their stories with wisdom and insight. It's basically the premise of this podcast. So it's like if you park me in front of a Ken Burns documentary, I'm occupied for hours. Now, if you do that and then make the topic something that I'm experienced and genuinely interested in, I'm hooked. And that is what Mike's book did for me. I caught the second half of the 90s Jamband Explosion once I broke away from mainstream radio and got into Fish, Mo, and other lesser-known jam bands in the latter half of the 90s. But all I knew at the time about them were their music, the names of the band members, and the basics of their history, like where they're from. What Mike's book, Sharing in the Groove, offers is a behind-the-scenes look as to what brought us this music and this scene, to me, to you, and how everyone had a role, whether or not we knew it at the time. Mike and I talk about different topics that the book touches on for nearly an hour of this episode, yet we barely scratch the surface. Again, Sharing in the Groove is a must-read. On top of that, Mike chose an all-time jam for his attendance bias pick, the Went Gin, that is Bathtub Gin, from the Great Went Festival, August 17th, 1997. When Mike first suggested it, I was genuinely surprised that it hadn't been discussed on this podcast already. Now, we don't go deep into the festival itself, but this singular 15-minute jam is enough to break down and appreciate as much as any other track ever discussed on here. But enough from me. Let's join Mike to talk about fraternity budgets, tape trading, file sharing, God Street wine, and much more as we discuss his book Sharing in the Groove, as well as the Went Gin from August 17th, 1997. Mike, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I am very excited to talk to you today. We are here to talk about your new book, Sharing in the Groove, The Untold History of the 90s Jamband Explosion. And then, for your Attendance Bias choice, you picked, gotta be honest, a track that I am shocked has not been discussed on this podcast yet. You picked one of the all-time great jams, the Went Gin, Bathtub Gin from the Great Went. How has everyone looked over that?
I have no idea. The only thing that I can that comes to mind is that maybe it's just too scary.
I had that thought a couple of months ago, maybe it was already a year ago. Someone asked if they could talk about the Quadrophenia show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I can ever do that. I don't know, because I'm such a big fan of The Who. The episode ended up being close to 2 hours, which is very long for me, and I had plenty more to say.
Well, I will say, like, when you sent me the list of things not to pick, the first thing I scrolled down to was exactly that show. I was there. It was incredible. It is one of my all-time favorites. The Quadrophenia is great. That third set just like still sticks with me. That You Enjoy Myself, like, I feel like a lot of people, they don't give that You Enjoy Myself the credit that it deserves. There was like the Bathtub Gin at the Rupp Arena, the You Enjoy Myself at Rosemont, 95 and 96, that were like these really epic exploratory jams. And now, like, look, Tweezer from Tahoe is great. No one's going to say it's not. Those things were like, those 90s moments, I just think are a little, deserve a little bit more love. But it sounds like you gave it some love on past bias.
Well, I have for sure, and I don't want to get off on a tangent before we even bring up the book, but I will say about that You Enjoy Myself, and I am thrilled that you brought it up. First of all, it's my favorite version that they've ever played. And I think the reason is it's so rare that of all these amazing jams that they've played, whether it's 90s, 1.0, 2.0, and so forth, there are all these great jams, but so few of them can encapsulate the greatness of a whole calendar year in one place. And that's what I think attracts me to that You Enjoy Myself. It's like if you want to know what Fish was up to in 1995, specifically fall 95, I have one 40-minute track for you to listen to, and then you can go off from there. I think that's what brings me to it. That everything I love about Fish in that year is in that You Enjoy Myself.
100%. That show, just front to back, is phenomenal. I was lucky enough to see the few shows running up. So I saw Kalamazoo and Detroit, and then Louisville, which was phenomenal as well. They're just on fire, and it still amazes me today that they could play these quote unquote regular shows days before and then have one day off and roll up to the Chicago and do that and never it's just one out of so many nuggets that why people love this band and the care that they put into their fans and their music. And just to talk about my book real quick, I think really shines throughout the book is that, yeah, these artists had a whole bunch of different pressures on them or avenues that they could go, say they could go radio, they could be this, band that sells 1 million, 2 million, 5 million CDs. They could be lumped into, alternative nation or whatever. At the end of the day, and Fish in particular, like they just really cared about community and their fans and doing things right by them and making things special to them, and they still do today. They did it a few weeks ago at SPAC, and they did it a few months ago with the Game Hinge at the Garden, and that's just such an amazing thing.
It is an amazing thing. And before we're at the mid 90s, we got to move back a little bit because your book called Sharing in the Groove: The Untold History of the 90s Jam Band Explosion. So we do get into Fish, but it should be noted, because I assume that most of my listeners, I hope, are big Fish fans, that despite the title and the front and center picture of Trey Anastasio on the cover, it is not a Fish-centric book. It's not the inside history of Fish. It's much wider than that. You cast a pretty wide net to cover what I would call, I guess, a movement, even, or at least a genre, in a time when genres were exploding everywhere. Just to bring it to the nuts and bolts, the book is an oral history with how many interviews? You must have had hundreds of interviews.
Yeah, I did 150 interviews, right on the nose. Yeah, I just started pulling at some threads. I'd get CD booklets that I found online and the booklets from like 95, 90, that era. It would always have credits of like who was the tour manager, who was the mixer. And then you could like piece together with like still things that you could find online and be like, oh yeah, this person was the record engineer, but was also like the monitors engineer for their tour. And so, let me track down this dude. And then I would, then at the end of every interview or most every interview, I would just say like, who else should I talk to? Like who else loves this era and has insights? And 9 times out of 10, oh, have you talked to this person? Have you talked to this person? Oh, no, I haven't. And, they're still in touch. So you either get an email or they would text them for me, which is super nice. It was kind of like I snowballed a lot of the interviews that way. I found out pretty quickly that people that worked for these bands, worked with these bands back then really have an affinity for that time period in their life. It was the coming of age for not only the fans, right? The fans were in their 20s at that time, mostly. They were finding their footing. The bands were finding their footing creatively and in an industry. Behind the scenes, folks were were doing the same. They really were, it really was a DIY movement where the love of music drove people, no matter how they were connected to it, to push it forward. That really started to emerge after numerous interviews, but it's like it became like a pretty early evident theme. I was like, oh, this is a fantastic narrative that probably a lot of people don't necessarily know, that I equate it a lot of times in my head to, the punk rock movement was very DIY, and it gets credited, as like a very DIY genre and music movement. But, the jam band in the 80s and early 90s was it had a lot of similarities. Like the music didn't sound the same. Maybe the fans didn't act the same or whatever.
I think it's the sense of
The
community that you brought up. I think that's really the
100%.
touching point.
For sure. Like the ethos around like connecting with people and making something bigger than themselves was so important. And I have something, we'll come back to this when we talk about the win.
Well, yeah, and I'm excited for that too. We mentioned that the book is an oral history. You use the phrase narrative. Oral histories, and anyone here who's listened to my episode, at least two of them with Rachel Wesley, who's also an author, I would say that oral histories are my favorite type of history. They're my favorite medium of literature. Bill Graham Presents is one of my favorite books. Live from New York, which was like the history of Saturday Night Live, which took me a billion years to read, but I loved every minute. ESPN, those guys have all the fun. Even the Fish book is an oral history with a little bit more narrative in it. Hear Me Talking to You, which is a great history of jazz. What I love about oral histories, and I took a while to really narrow this down before speaking with you, is I think that they tackle concepts and, in your case, a time period that are kind of impossible to understand through a narrative because they're not textbooks, right? This is not based on facts. For me, these kind of books go for the truth, as opposed to, let's say, a nonfiction narrative, which is to confirm facts, right? Truth and facts, we're getting a little philosophical here. To me, the truth is more an agreed upon feeling or emotion, or at least a philosophy of a time period or an experience. So, for example, there's a spot in your book about the Arrowhead Ranch, right? The famous venue in upstate New York that was run by David Graham, Bill Graham's son. And the owner of the ranch describes an angry phone call with David Graham. And then the next line in the book is a quote from David Graham, and it says, "That did not happen." So there's not a fact there, right? One of them thinks he's right, the other one thinks he's right, but there's a truth there about the condition of the running of the ranch at the time, right? It was unstable, to say the least, after that first season.
That's an accurate read about oral histories. I don't think anybody that reads this or any of the others should expect anybody's memories to be extremely crystal clear. But they have versions of reality of what happened,
And they're honest.
and they're
Even if they're not
honest.
all
Yeah,
crystal clear, they are honest.
they're honest, and to me, that's humanity. That's our how we exist in our world every day. Whether you're interacting with somebody face to face or trying to parse out online, is it real or not? Like, I got the fortunate part of listening to the people articulate these sentiments, and 100% they are like they're honest. They're speaking from their being, their soul. But it's exactly what you said. The goal is to try to construct a narrative for each chapter, and then hopefully those chapters weave into a bigger narrative and give people essentially a fly on the wall glimpse of what life was like back then,
That's what
whether
I
you were
love. One of
whether
one
you
of
there or
my
not.
yeah, one of my lightning round questions that I sometimes ask guests is, if you could go back in time and be a fly on the wall for any moment in fish history, whether it's an on-stage moment or an off-stage moment, where would you want to go? And people love that question and they hate it. Because they can't think of an answer, but they love the idea of being a fly on the wall. And I think that's what your book accomplishes, because we, as the audience, right, the listeners on the radio or the attendees of the concert, we see the tip of the iceberg. Right? To me, context is everything. So going to see a concert or hearing in 1992 or 1993 the Spin Doctors on the radio, we see the end result. We see the product, but what your book does is it kind of gives us all the context of how that product came to us. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
interested in.
With a book like this, with like a scene like this, do people really want to hear a narrative written through by me, or do they want to hear from the people that lived it? I mean, I personally would want to hear it from the people that lived it versus like a dense, almost academic-y treatment of a scene. I want to know how these people felt. Like I want to know what they were going through straight from their mouth. I would like to hope that it's attractive to people. I think it would be.
Well, I imagine it is. I hope that it is, and I hope that a lot of people buy this book, and whether it's out of their own curiosity or in a more academic way, not like a textbook, but a more, I want to know what happened before I came on the scene. Because a lot of this happened just before I did. So I'm in my early 40s. And so I was only like 8 or 9 years old, maybe a little bit older than that, when Blues Traveler and the Spin Doctors got on the radio. And my first Fish show was in 1997. I got into them in 96. So a lot of this happened, or at least the second half of your book, which covers roughly 10 to 12 years, happened before I was savvy to the scene. So to me, it makes me appreciate what I saw and went through even more because now I know what the prelude was, right? This is we're all actors, all the world's a stage. I want to know what happened before I got on stage. And that's what I love the most about it.
Yeah, look, the prelude is super important. Fish was making very deliberate decisions about their philosophies in like 92 and 93 that set them up for, what became the Clifford Ball several years later. And had they gone different directions, like you might have seen a very different Clifford Ball. You might not have seen a Clifford Ball at all. There is a funny narrative in there from Dave Fry, the one of the original Blues Traveler managers who helped create Horde with John Popper, and he's talking about how backstage at Jones Beach, he was talking about Fish management about, this is going so great. The promoters are really into it, and we got to do this next summer. It's going to be bigger and better. And are you in? And they were like, we're never doing this again.
It's Paige, right? Paige says,
Yeah,
I don't know if we're in on this.
it's like it's all Fish all the time from here on out. And that was like summer 92. Think about it, like fast forward to 2 years later, they're releasing Hoist. The general consensus when you release a CD back then is that you promote it very hard and you do everything you can to make the CD sell a lot and you play the songs all the time and the radio, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't do that, first of all. They kept doing their thing. And it feels like instead of caring about promoting something for a record label, that summer in the Schweiss, they sent out a call for albums to cover for Halloween from the fans, if I'm remembering correctly, and that they would play an album from start to finish as a costume that same year. So in like to me, that's like, yeah, that's all Fish all the time. And they're doubling down on what we were just talking about, like this community and fan aspect and keeping people on their toes and doing what they wanted to do versus just selling a CD, making a music video. Around that same time, they made their first and only video for Down with Disease. Terrible, didn't do anything. And
And hanging with
uh,
MTV.
yeah, and they did hang with MTV in 92, I think, but they knew they didn't need to do that. And creating these moments at Glen Falls made it so the appetite only increased within the fan community even more. And so when the Clifford Ball comes around, yeah, 70,000 people showed up with very little media attention. And It's an amazing coup. It's an amazing feat.
And that
And
never changed. I remember when they announced the Island Tour in 1998, they didn't buy $1 worth of promotion. It was all just announced on their website. I remember that being a big deal at the time, that they sold out
yeah,
4 nights in 2 venues without having to buy any promotion. I remember that sent shockwaves through like Spin Magazine. I remember reading that was my outlet for finding what's new in music.
yeah. They didn't, and at that point they didn't need to. And I think if you go back to that horde story that I was just talking about, it's that they likely saw something with ticket sales and fandom and tape sharing and early online activity that was likely pointing them to the notion that you're good. like 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 you're good. You don't need to like be a supporting act. You don't, I mean, sure, they were occasionally like, yes, they opened for Santana on in 96 summer in Europe, also in 92. Ultimately, I think they just love Santana. And if one of your heroes is asking you to play some shows, you're like, yeah, of course. But that's besides the point. I think they saw what was happening and that they wanted to make a run on their own. And
And that goes back to Amy's Farm. It goes back before the Horde Tour, too. We're like, we're going to throw a
sure,
party and invite all of our friends, and more than just our friends show up. We have something here.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Them and all the other acts in this book from that era, just incredible work ethics.
Well, I
You know,
wanted to
like
ask you
just
about that because your book, as we mentioned earlier, is not fish centric. I think it's 30 pages before fish is even mentioned, or if not mentioned, at least they become a centerpiece. And it's 40 pages before widespread panic shows up at all. What I loved about the way you tell this story is that you establish the context of the world. It starts in, I think, 87 or 88. It starts with Blues Traveler and the Spin Doctors. As our fan base, when I say our, as if we are Fish, but as Fish's fan base keeps growing with younger fans in the whatever point oh era we're in, the 4.0 era, I think a lot of people take a look at it and say, oh, Fish has always been the center. They were very much not the center, that the Spin Doctors and Blues Traveler were really the up and coming bands in the late 80s and early 90s in New York City. So you start there. And then 30 and 40 pages in, you move to Burlington from New York, right? You start in Princeton, New Jersey, and then you move to New York City, and then it expands to both Athens, Georgia, and Burlington, Vermont. So, like the way I thought of it, it's like concentric storytelling, concentric circles, where you start with the center, and then you move out one level, and then you move out another level, and then by the mid '90s, now it's Dave Matthews Band is coming in, and Aquarium Rescue Unit, and Colonel Bruce Hampton, and so there's still the center circle, right? Blues Traveler and the Spin Doctors don't really ever leave the narrative, but the narrative grows. And I really appreciated that you started at the center and blossomed out from there, as opposed to just starting with what's the most popular thing now and provided the title of the book too.
yeah. I mean, look, things were happening at the same time, and people didn't know it. I mean, was playing at Nectar's in Burlington in 85, 86, 87. You can get those tapes. But Blues Traveler and God Street Wine and Spin Doctors were doing it also in New York, and Panic was doing it in Athens, like kind of at the same time, really at the same time.
But those two
And
were more regional, right? Fish was kind of a New England
the
band until
regional.
about 89 or 90.
Totally. Yeah. So they're regional, but they are getting in the van and just finding bars outside of their hometown to play in, coming back, playing 3 nights at Nectar's or whatever. But in New York, I just thought it was interesting to start in New York because it had multiple bands that were driving original music that at the beginning didn't have record labels, wanted to play as much as they could every single night, had a city that had a an appetite for original music as like every night, so they could play. That set things off, and of course, it was like home to the record industry. So they actually were getting noticed by A&R and labels way closer, or sorry, way sooner than Panic and Fish. And so that to me was like those acts were graduating a little sooner in terms of like the broadening of the scene. And they also had Dave Graham, who put his dad, Bill, onto Blues Traveler. And either in 89 or 90, Blues Traveler was starting off playing like tiny clubs. And by the end of the year, they're opening for the Allman Brothers out in California for New Year's Eve. You know, Fish wasn't opening for the Allman Brothers in 1989 at an arena. So I just thought that like they had a little bit more push behind them that was like catapulting them a little bit bigger. I'm not, but you know, Blues Traveler, the caveat is Blues Traveler maybe had a minor hit with But Anyway, but really didn't hit with the popular conscious until four came out.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I remember like Blues Traveler and the Spin Doctors linked together in popular consciousness. I for years before I discovered their like quote, I'm putting this in quotes, jam band roots, they were like Columbia House bands. They were the
Right,
bands that had the big ad in Columbia House when you had to fill
right.
out the little codes to get your 10
Yes.
CDs for $1 or whatever it was, or a penny.
Penny.
They
Yeah.
Pocket Full of Kryptonite was the big ad. Everyone had it, the
Right.
album. Everyone did. And then they didn't have a huge follow-up, as you discuss in your book, that they had so much pressure put on them to come up with another huge hit that, you know, millions and millions of units would be shipped. It didn't happen. So I think a lot of people, and maybe I'm projecting, a lot of people put those bands in like one-hit wonder territory when there's really so much to dig into.
That was the 90s. I mean, you know, you could argue Red Hot Chili Peppers were the same way with Under the Bridge, maybe Pearl Jam with 10. Like that was like the record industry because everybody was consuming things on the radio. The radio would maybe play two songs if you're lucky. Maybe I'm wrong about the Chili Peppers. Californication was pretty big. But
But that was at the end of
yeah,
the 90s,
was that
Californication, right? Blood
it was
Sugar
at the
Sex
end of the
Magic.
90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like you definitely had these Columbia House bands and like CDs were the way that you would discover things. Labels certainly could provide you with a way to get your band or your name out there. Like the Mo guys certainly told me when they signed to Sony that they thought they were going to get to a much bigger audience. I thought they were going to get to a much bigger audience when No Joy came out. But then Sony kind of, I mean, they slept on them for one thing, but you know, they had other fish to fry. You know, that's just one example of a band that can go through a major label system then and you know, not have the Chili Peppers effect, you know, not have
And
the Spin Doctors effect, but the Spin Doctors had the opposite effect where then they get, you know, to be characterized as a two-hit wonder. Yeah, I mean, they're all greatly trained musicians and were doing like pretty wild creative stuff in the late 80s before they got signed and like right around when they got signed. So but that's what radios did.
I think it was in the Fish book that Paul Fox, who was the producer of Hoist, that I think it's Page who says this in the Fish book that he was coming off a 10,000 Maniacs album, Our Time in Eden, and that Fish was supposed to be the next band he was supposed to break. I loved in your book how many times that phrase is used, that how many, you know, they were trying to break this band. When was this band going to break? I don't think that language exists anymore in the record industry. I don't know anything about it, but I would imagine because we listen as consumers, we find our music differently. We listen differently. The media is completely different, right? Physical media for all intents and purposes, is extinct, you know, except for the people who reach out for it. It's not given to us that way anymore.
Yeah, look, it's not the only way to consume. I mean, back then, like if you wanted things, you had to make an effort, right? That's why I love thinking back to the tape trading days.
Fish tickets by mail with the money orders.
Fish, fish tickets by mail. I have super vivid memories of going to my post office with all the instructions for the tickets by mail and talking to the woman doing the counter at the mail and being like please don't lose this, and she's like you're like the 10th person who's dropped one of these off. I'm on it. Like the caring that you could put into your fandom, especially with this community, was like none other. I think in that time, making tapes for people, I spent countless hours making tapes for people that I never met off of rec.music.fish, just because you believed in spreading the music. Now, don't get me wrong, having nugs in my pocket, having live fish in my pocket, it's pretty awesome. But we're about to talk about the Went soon, and I was listening to the Went, my download of it today. And you didn't go? Did you go to Went?
I did not. My first festival was it.
But you know that at the Clifford Ball and the Went, they had like Clifford Ball Radio and
Sure.
the Went Radio, which broadcast all the sets. So you could theoretically, I guess, listen to them at your tent or whatever. But people taped them,
That's why we have
and
soundboards.
so like you had soundboards a day after the show was done for these festivals, and they were like the hottest commodity. And it felt like, honestly, it felt like everybody jumped in together to spread these soundboards as fast as possible, because not only was it great music, but also it was like you didn't get soundboards that fast. Right now, you get them the day after or
The night of.
30 minutes after. Back then, it was like the most rare thing. I remember I think at the ball, maybe it's probably a great win. I taped their one or two of their archive shows, and I would use that as trade bait because it was Fish playing never before released soundboard versions from their vault. And I was like, this is great. The show's not going on. I'm just sitting around. I taped it, and it certainly was like a my theory that it would be good trade bait. It worked.
Of course. I remember at Super Bowl, after the sets, they had a huge TV screen set up at Super Bowl. And they played, I'll have to check this in the fact check, but they were playing footage from, I think it's August 14th, 1993 at Darien Lake with the Merry Pranksters. And that was a show that people.
97.
97. Okay. Thank
Yes.
you.
Sorry to fact check you live on the air, but
I appreciate it. I'm a teacher, so in my real life, so I want to be called out when I'm wrong. Like I appreciate authenticity and facts, but I remember sitting down and watching it and thinking, this is what I'm missing from listening to the show on tape. The visuals. It made
right.
sense, or maybe it didn't make sense depending on what you were on, but it at least it connected when you saw what was going on. When you listened to the bozos on audio, that's a fast forward. It's almost like the vocal jam in You Enjoy Myself. It's like sometimes you just can't hear it if you can't see it. It drops a lot. So having
Yeah,
that trade bait, that works. But I did
it
want to bring it
works.
back. I wanted to bring it back though to your book though. What do you think? I don't know if you have an answer for this. I have my own theory, but what do you think was in the water in the late 80s, early 90s that influenced this sort of out of the box musical style, whether it's your description of Dave Matthews Band having like a saxophone in a pop rock band, or Robert Walter and Carl Denson in Southern California, who were not, by their own admission, were not familiar with Fish or the Grateful Dead, but they still shared that ethos of having eclectic styles of music and improvisation. I don't know, was something culturally in the air in America that could be influenced and encouraged that would eventually become to known as jam band music? Because to the credit of your book, almost nobody, none of the interviewees used that phrase until the second half. The word jam band
Right.
didn't really exist until the 90s.
I kind of characterize it as like these are like islands. It's like the island of the misfit toys,
Yeah.
right? They don't sound like the things that are popular. Sometimes they don't even sound like the things that are popular in the towns that they're at. Okay. They work really hard. They have a strong feeling about how they want to approach live music and improv, and they don't repeat the same thing every night. And they know that their crowd doesn't want that. And they keep coming back because they don't. I wouldn't necessarily say that Panic and Fish are from they're carbon copies of each other. I wouldn't say that at all. Like they sound really different to me. And even in the 90s, like the early 90s tapes, you can hear they sound very different. And there's a great chapter in this book about how Panic wanted to come to the Northeast and they couldn't, or they didn't really know promoters, or in cold calling a promoter would be like, okay, what label are you on? How many fans are you going to bring out? Like, oh, you're from Athens and you have no fans and you have no label in the Northeast? Eh. And Fish would do the same thing, wanting to go to the Southeast. So they connected with each other and teamed up for a tour that, where Panic could open doors for them in the South because they had gone to clubs and bars and frats and played them and had the connections, and those people knew them and saw that they brought a crowd. Oh, well, we're going to bring our friends from the Northeast Fish. They're going to open for us. Okay, whatever. Vice versa, Fish having Panic open. I think the something in the water was we're going to do this. We love it. And until people tell us to stop and stop showing up, we're going to keep doing it, and they keep doing it, and it's great.
I remember the early 90s as, first of all, as I'm graduating elementary school, as a time of innovation, with the internet and a lot of technology being invented and acceptance being encouraged. I think that it was a time when it was a reaction to the conservatism, the social conservatism of the 80s, right? This is now Gen Xers are now in college and a big focus on environmentalism, which gets lumped in also with a lot of, progressive beliefs and thoughts at the time. And I think when you're in colleges, because a lot of these bands, that's where their audience was, right? In college towns, right? Dave Matthews Band in Charlottesville. And so I think there was something connecting there too. So I think there was a lot of that mixed in where Dave Matthews Band, you hear his sound. I remember him being played on like being classified as world music. So I think there was that effect of it too. That a kind of when you're in college, you're willing to try new things. Everything you said, I agree with for sure. I just think the early 90s was a lot of let's try everything. And it all and musically mixed together in this kind of gumbo.
Yeah, there certainly was that. For better or for worse, this like quote unquote alternative movement in music. And, there's a popular thought that, Nirvana and grunge and all that sort of stuff was a reaction to 80s hair metal. I don't know if it was a reaction so much as it was, just people wanting to do their thing, but it swung a different way, like what you're saying in terms of like socially accepted.
I do think culture is a pendulum. I've heard it before. That's not an original thought. I just happen to agree with it.
Yeah. And these bands, I haven't really thought too much though about whether or not the culture at large was providing room for them to grow and to find an audience. I mean, you talk about the the colleges, and yeah, colleges were super important for these bands to grow. The bands figured out early on that they could tap into a fraternity's money and go to a frat house and play a gig and get $10,000, $5,000 that would float them for a month versus playing, a gig at a bar and hoping to get two, $300, which they did do. They did it all. So you had that, early 90s, when you went to college with your tuition, you got an internet account. And no one had the internet. I mean, you might have had AOL dial up if you were lucky, but for the most part, America didn't have the internet. Okay, like in the grand scheme of things.
And certainly
But
not as we know it.
not as we know it, but college kids did, and they could go on message boards and Usenet groups and talk about their favorite bands and share music, share set lists, share lore.
Sure,
So like
porn.
you could do that too. But like you created, like they were able to use this thing that they were already paying for, like a college meal plan, and use it to proliferate this culture, I guess, underground, but like in ways that the record labels couldn't stop, and the bands definitely didn't want to stop. Oh, you want to record our music and send it around all the country for free, and we don't have to pay for it? That sounds like a great deal.
Yeah, the record labels
Like
didn't get it, but the bands did.
the band's got it. Yeah. I mean, it was a great deal. Like, there's a great story in there about how Dave Matthews going to the Fox in Boulder for the first time and being flabbergasted that everybody in the audience knew the words to their songs. How did that happen? Well, it happened the way I just described it.
Yeah, and I lived through it 2.0. I lived through the second wave, right when file sharing became a lot more
Yeah.
prevalent. I went to college in 2000. So the first time I had an Ethernet connection and a CD burner connected on the same computer, I didn't have a girlfriend, but I had a lot of Fish CDs all of a sudden. It's
I
the
mean,
same thing,
like,
just not, just it is physical media. It's just not, it's trading. I don't know. I guess it
it's
is.
trading.
It's
Yeah,
virtually the same thing.
it is totally the same thing. I mean, yeah, it morphed from analog cassettes over to burned
The
CDs.
information age.
Yeah, I mean, you probably have incredibly fond memories of doing that and like getting something in the mail that was a CD that someone made for you. It wasn't manufactured on some sort of printing plant and
No,
is
I
in
remember
every Tower
Fish.
Records.
They played 2000 in Chicago, and I remember getting it in the mail. And I'm like, this is gonna. I think it's October 4th, 2000. I'll fact check that. Redbird Arena, something like that. And I remember being like, oh my god, this is the best show ever. Meanwhile, if we go back and listen to that audience recording now, it's garbage. It sounds terrible, but it was precious to me.
Precious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to wrap this up real quick. I read this book in about 3 days or 2.5 days. This spoke to me, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. I couldn't get enough of it. So this book ends roughly around the year 2000, right? It starts roughly 87, 88 and ends around 2000, and it has an epilogue of multiple participants, interviewees, reflecting on what those preceding 10 years meant to them or giving kind of big picture thoughts on what it was like to live through that decade. So I wanted to ask you, are you already working on the sequel? The second Jamband Explosion that began, at least the way I see it, once Fish went on hiatus in October 2000. Suddenly, there was this huge vacuum that guys like me, who were 17 and 18 years old, just starting college, all of a sudden we had some disposable income and a lot of free time and less responsibilities, certainly, than I have now. For Fish fans, and Fish was nowhere to be found. So now there were a lot more bands that became more prominent and accessible, like off the top of my head, the New Master Sounds, Robert Randolph and the Family Band, Tea Leaf Green, one of my favorites, New Monsoon, Humphreys McGee, Yonder Mountain, the Disco Biscuits, even though they were around prior. Now it was like this festival culture, I guess I could call it, with the first Bonnaroo in 2002. There's this continuation of this story that you cover in this book, and file sharing, as we're segueing right into it, blew up the traditional music industry definition of success, and this jam band community spread out even wider. Do you think there's a story to be told there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stories. I haven't thought about it too much, but yeah, I agree. There's like already I see like the first chapter being on September 10th, 2001, which was the last show of the Wetlands, which DJ Logic and friends played, and it got out at 5 in the morning on September 11th.
Jesus Christ.
That
What if you
that
had to go to
that
work?
I know, like that to me is like a great first chapter. There's, unfortunately, like Mikey Hauser from Panic passed away. Fish went on hiatus for most of that decade, or at least, sorry, half of that decade. And yeah, it gave rise to a lot of other bands. Like Mo was playing Radio City Music Hall 2 nights in 2006. Like you said, like Humphreys was finding a good audience, string cheese as well. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stories to tell, and I'm also very happy to see that there's, I guess, a third wave from the '90s with like Goose and Billy Strings and Peggy and Michaela Davis. Like, they're just doing their own thing and doing new things, but it seems like it has threads rooted back then. And Karina Reichman, like all of that stuff, not only is great, but it's fun to see them wave their like fish flag very high, but they like Fish want to do their own thing. Like Fish never really got the dead comparisons because they were listening and seeing what they were doing, and it was like, well, the Dead doesn't play a song like Iculus, right?
Right.
Like it's
Right.
they don't have a Gamehenge narrative. There's new acts today that are doing a lot of things that are rooted in that '90s and 2000 world, and are very influenced, and they are keeping it alive. I don't know, just doing
Well,
amazing
it's an
things.
ethos, I think, more so than a specific music style, right? So there are
Totally,
bands that are like jam band adjacent, like My Morning Jacket, for example. Like you don't go to see them jam necessarily, but if you go to a festival, they might be headlining one night where Trey or Fish might be headlining the next night.
totally.
One more time, the book is called Sharing in the Groove by Mike Ayers, The Untold History of the 90s Jam Band Explosion. Mike, where can people find it and where should they buy it? What's best for you? What's best for the book?
They can buy it wherever they like to buy books. Every place has it. I would recommend your indie bookstore in your local community. It's been stocked very well across the country in that regard. They can't find it there, they can DM me. I'll ship it to them. I'll sign it. I've
Awesome.
done it. I've done it already. I've done it for a bunch of people.
Well, Mike, we got to know a bit about you as an author, as a music fan, and as a researcher and a writer. But let's get to know you as a fish fan with the attendance bias lightning round.
Attendance bias lightning round.
Mike, when was your first fish show and what do you remember about it?
My first show was at the Patriot Center in Fairfax, Virginia, October 8th, 1994. I remember it was a fall, like fall was setting in. The sun was setting like around like 5 or 6, and the parking lot it had some activity, but not a ton. But the place was packed. It's like a 10,000 person like arena. Weirdly, that was the second time they played there that year. I remember during the first set, I was in love. I was just like, wow, this is like so energetic. This is so like, this is what I've been looking for. Like these guys are close to my age, and they just they're just giving it all. Now, the second set, I, I don't think I'll ever forget. They were playing Mike's song. They slowed it down to a stop. They brought out a soccer team of 10-year-old girls, and did a chant that like they had them do their like soccer chant.
We win in our gym.
Yeah. And then they left and they started the song back up. No context. And I was like, this is so weird and funny. And who does this? This is my band. This is it. This is it. And a couple of weeks later, they were playing at a few days before the Halloween show where they played the White Album. They played at UVA in Charlottesville. I was at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And it was like a Wednesday night. We drove up there, and this place was half the size of the Patriot Center. It's tiny. It was great. They encored with Iculus, Slave to the Traffic Light, and Tweezer Reprise, I think. Fantastic. And I was like maybe 3 or 4 rows deep that whole show. From there, it was just, I was in it.
What's your most recent show as of today's conversation, and what did you think of it?
It was at SPAC on Saturday night show at SPAC. I was going to Burlington for some book stuff, which was super fun. And the book stuff started on Monday. And so I did not see the Sunday night SPAC show where they did the Tweezer Reprise everywhere because I was driving to Burlington, but I did see the Saturday night show. I loved it. I'm pretty like I saw both Forest Hills and Friday and Saturday night of SPAC, so I saw 4 shows in a row. I don't know. I loved them all. I don't really get too critical or anything about them these days. Like they literally can do anything, and I will just have a blast. Like I just want to see them play and have fun, and they do. And they're still so creative, and that's all I want. And they do it every time. That's why I keep going. At this point, that's why I keep going back. You know, in the '90s, would be like, oh man, they played Dirt this night, and then they played it 2 nights later and repeated it. What are they doing? This is crazy. But now, if they played Dirt and repeated it on a show, I'd be like, that sounds great.
Yeah, it's like in Billy Madison. Cherish it. Cherish it.
Yes, it's exactly like that. Yeah, and I do. So I saw more shows this summer than I've seen in a long time. It was great. I loved it. I still see some songs that I've never heard before live, which is cool. I see songs that I used to love in the '90s that I don't hardly ever hear ever again. And they sometimes show up and bring back a lot of amazing memories, like my old home place. I saw New Hampshire this summer, and I was like, I'm the only person around me freaking out, but I'm like, I love this song. Like I used to hear this fairly often in the '90s at some really great shows, and it's a perfect. I don't know how to describe it.
I think we all know, especially in '94, right? Fall '94, when the Reverend Jeff Mosier was teaching them how to play bluegrass. It was like every night. So you could feel that, when you listen to the tapes, and it never left.
Yeah, that first show that I was talking to you about, like at the Patriots Center, they did foreplay long time on their acoustic instruments as the encore. I was like, what is this? Like this is like this has everything.
Yeah, it'll make you weak in the knees.
Yeah, weak in the knees, and then the show I was telling you about that I saw several weeks later at UVA, so radically different. And it's just like, I think that's always been the draw, and it continues to be the draw. I love that people love that.
Since this podcast is a lot about nostalgia and remembering good times, I was so glad that your book could provide me with lightning round questions that I don't really ask anyone ever.
Oh, great.
So, in that roughly 1990 to 2000 time period, now you have a time machine. Congratulations. You've invented time travel. You can go back to any venue from that time period that maybe still exists, maybe it doesn't exist anymore, but you can go back for one night to see a show. You don't need a specific show, but which venue would you revisit for
I'd
one
probably
night?
go to the Wetlands. Like the Wetlands was iconic. It really it was just like this home base for the scene. And if you were an act that was from out of town and you played music that no other clubs wanted, the Wetlands would have you. right? And you could find an audience, and maybe Georgia Theater in the early '90s, or Uptown Lounge in Athens in the '80s. They all sound awesome. I went to the Georgia Theater in the late '90s. It was still the same, but probably seeing like Panic in the early '90s or late '80s in Athens, at Uptown or Georgia Theater would be great. So those would be and Nectar's. I definitely Nectar's. I met Nectar himself a few weeks ago at my Burlington show, not show, but Burlington event. He came out for it and was super nice, and we had drinks afterwards. It was fantastic.
That's awesome. That almost bleeds
Yeah.
into my next question, which is what is one band from that era that you absolutely loved, but is no longer together? So, in other words, if you could snap your fingers and bring one band completely back together, who would it be?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
This might blow your mind, but I don't think it'll blow your mind. I think a lot of people want this, but it's just maybe doesn't get said enough. Medeski Martin Wood.
I'm
Like
not
I
blown.
want
My
them.
mind's not blown. I've seen them a number of times, and it's
I
always
want them to like play like they don't need to play like full blown tours, but I'd love for them to do like what the Panic does, where they'll these days where they'll play like weekends. Like if they did like 5 weekends a year, like maybe one in New York and one in San Francisco and like one in Boulder, places that were like super hip to them to begin with and still are. And I would love that.
they feature very prominently in your book, by the way. For anyone out there listening that likes MMW, that's just another reason to pick this book up
I
if you
think they
haven't
were
yet been
so
inclined.
important.
Yeah,
I think they were so important. Like they were a band that got on Blue Note, but had this massive hippie following that was somewhat accidental in their eyes. I mean, it definitely wasn't deliberate. But they played incredible music. They wrote incredible music. Their first album for Blue Note, Combustication, instead of going like the straight and narrow path, they throw Logic on. Like they're throwing a DJ on. We loved it, but like in terms of like the grand scheme of things, that seems wild.
yeah, it
Like
would be
here,
sacrilegious to a lot of jazz fans
yeah, of course, and
and
especially
musicians.
back then.
Yeah,
Yeah, like and they did it just like all these other acts. They did things that went against the grain. I mean, someone was telling me the other day about how Gottfried Wine was like playing a record release show for their second label in like maybe '96 or '97 at Irving Plaza, and all these record people were there from the label. And instead of opening up with a song from the record that they're probably going to try to be played on radio, they open up with like a 15-minute instrumental. That takes some gusto, man. Like that's holding your ground, and putting a DJ on is holding your ground. So yeah, but if they don't, like, I have a lot of live audio, and they still have like little formations here and there that I think are cool. Like the last couple years after the Fish shows and New Year's Eve in New York, they've been doing after shows with Scott Metzger from J-Rad and Nels
right.
Klein from Wilco and Medeski and Martin. And I went to one, and it was literally all improv, and it's just they still do things that are great. But like, yeah, if I could roll up to see an MMW show, I'd love it.
And finally, the last question I ask every guest on attendance bias: what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Fish show?
I can tell you a weird story that happened after a tour. I'm sorry, during a tour, I drove out to St. Louis in '97 to start a run of like '97 summer shows. I think I saw every summer show from St. Louis all the way to the Went. And after that first show in St. Louis, we were driving to Illinois, and we pulled off. Like all these Fish cars were pulling off at this exit that did say camping at that exit, right? And so I started following all these cars, and like me and my buddy were following it, and we ended up going into this huge field, and people were just throwing up tents. I was like, wow, this is like crazy, but like yeah, we need to claim a spot and, whatever. So we did. And then and we got our tent up and everything. And then 30 minutes later, we heard these shotguns go off and like got out, like, and they weren't stopping. And we got out of the tent, like, what is going on, everybody? Like, what's going on? And we weren't at a campground. We were on somebody's like private land. And they were like, what is happening here? Get off our property. And we're shooting up into the air. And everybody was like scrambling, right? We just pulled our tent down, didn't fold it up, just threw it in the car, drove, slept at a rest stop. And that was kind of weird.
When was this show played?
So you chose to discuss today the bathtub gin from the Great Went, obviously well known, widely known as the Went gin. So the Great Went, for anyone who doesn't know, was Fish's second large-scale festival after the Clifford Ball, and it was the first one to be held at the Loring Air Force Base in Limestone, extremely remote location. The festival was at the end of the summer tour on August 16th and 17th, 1997. When I say we, I just mean generally my guests. The Great Went has been discussed here and there, just never a focus of an episode. Crime against humanity. When you come back, we could focus on the Great Went as a whole. But just to skim the top of it, I got some basic facts on fish.com of all places. They don't have an exact figure, but somewhere between 65,000 and 70,000 fans are said to have attended. I think the general consensus is that the Went is the musically superior festival compared to any other than Big Cypress, I think. That's just the sense that I get speaking to people. Some of the better known features of the Great Went include Spencer Tunick's record-breaking nude photo shoot, which is shown in Bittersweet Motel. The art jam, also shown in the documentary at the end of the festival, where a piece of painted art from the band was combined with a piece from the fans, and then it was ceremoniously burned at the end of the weekend. And that's some of my favorite music. The art jam, as it's listed. It's just so sweet and ambient, and it's like psychedelic planetarium music that I love. This, talk about blowing minds, forget Medeski Martin and Wood. Tickets for the Great Went cost $70 for the weekend, which included camping. For the people who have only gone to festivals in the 3.0 or since 2009, let's say, the music for the Great Went was broken up into just 2 days. Each day included 3 sets, as opposed to the more recent festivals, which are usually 3 or 4 days with 2 sets apiece. And the band played what I consider underappreciated, a disco set at 2:30 in the morning. I would have completely missed this if I were there. I would have been asleep for probably 3 hours already. After the Saturday night set with each band member on a synthesizer. And this version of Bathtub Gin, which was played in the second set on Saturday after the set opening, Down with Disease, right in the heart of the festival. So this gin is widely considered one of the best versions of the song ever played, sometimes cited as one of the best jams the band has ever played. Why do you have attendance bias toward this specific performance?
This encapsulates why this band is so great. And that's because I think I just said, I had seen I had seen shows for 11 days. They didn't play for 11 straight days, but I had seen a lot of Fish in a very compact amount of time. I was a little beat down from traveling and sleeping and not getting shot and all those sorts of things. And but this is what this band can do. You can have all of these things happen, and they can come out in an instant. They can enthrall you like they've never enthralled you ever before. And that is what happened to me during this Went, Jen.
And because, as you mentioned, so many people recorded it from the on-site radio station, we're lucky enough to have a soundboard copy of it. So it spread like wildfire. And everyone immediately said, this is the magic. This is it. So it's right after a set opening 27-minute Down with Disease, right? So if this bathtub gin was standard, people would still be talking about the Down with Disease. It kind of gets forgotten in the larger sense of things, in the larger community sense. But the first thing to note, this whole track is just over 15 minutes long. A couple of minutes ago, we were talking about this past summer 2025 tour, which is filled with 20 or 25 plus minute jams. You know, people gush over 20-minute jams as if it's this kind of minimum that needs to be reached to be talking about any given jam, as if it's some sort of golden ring. This is a great reminder that greatness can happen in a more compact amount of time, right? This is not going to eat up your afternoon to listen to this Went Gin.
No, it is compact. I mean, I hadn't listened to it in a while, and I listened to it again recently. I mean, I've listened to it so much over the
It's
years.
probably in your DNA.
It's in the DNA, but like, really like around like the 6:28 mark, like you can start hearing Trey's like pulling the band up with his guitar lines. And minute by minute, there's this like it's like this slow build. Each minute does not sound like the minute before, but you know that it is connected. And if the minute before never existed, you would never have the minute now. So by the time like 12 minutes is kicking in, they're in a place that was just it's just so indicative of how they can communicate with music on stage and how they love doing it. And you're right, like that's certainly a thing that I was thinking about today in terms of longevity and their jams or whatever. I remember like, in the 90s, like there was a few long things that got talked about. You heard me complaining that not a lot, not enough love is given to You Enjoy Myself for Halloween '95. But, I think it was that like Tweezer at Memphis, Runaway Jim at Walnut Creek, like those were like pretty massive jams. And those were like in the instant Hall of Fame
Yeah.
back then. Like everybody was like, "Oh yeah, these things are ridiculous." But it wasn't like it just feels like nowadays, like if there is something that goes over a certain period of time, that it's deemed
Like an instant classic or jam of the
instant
tour.
classic or amazing. And a lot of times it is. Look, the Chalk Dust from SPAC the other night was 30 minutes long, 29 minutes long. It was fantastic. It went places I was like, I've never heard this band do this before. Yes, please. Great. I like the Went Gen still. because it is so tight and it is so compact in the grand scheme of things, but it's so euphoric out of nowhere. Like you talk about the euphoria with like a song like Harry Hood, like the end of Harry Hood, which will get me every time. I love like that feeling. Like, if you want to talk about a meme real quick, the Hood Kid from like 10 years ago. Like, yeah, the Hood Kid is all of us. And I watch the Hood Kid so much because I love seeing his euphoria around the euphoria that we have all agreed upon is euphoric. But the bathtub gin from that moment is euphoria in a place where no one really expected it. And just listening to it get there, it's hard to put into words.
It is, but I'm really glad when you started describing your experience with it that you named some timestamps. And when I was listening, I also have listened to this a trillion times. We have almost the same exact timestamps. I don't think that that's a coincidence. There are certain angles, there are certain turns where something amazing happens, and if it's not amazing
Correct.
on its face right away, it's amazing when you see how it leads to the next step. So
It leads to the next step, and you have to have this, like, Fish has always rewarded a sense of patience. With this, you have to have patience for about 10 minutes in a
not
sense
even,
that,
not even. I'm
yeah,
sorry, I'm
not
going to
even
push
like
back on
Amen's.
this. You
All right,
mentioned even at 6 minutes, the band is kind of playing against one another with like accents and rhythms with this, and with the soundboard recording, like everyone is evenly matched. No one's taking the lead. They're all just
right,
playing. And to
right.
me, it's a good representation of that summer 97 tour. And then I think you said 8 minutes. I wrote it 7.5. Like Page makes this one of the most recognizable spots. He's on the piano. And
Yes.
that's when the euphoria begins, at least for me. And then you know what you're listening to, at least I do, when that part hits. And it would eventually become known as bliss jamming. I'm putting that phrase in quotes. I wrote the word patient also. They're patient, and then they blow the top off at 9.5 minutes. Like we're all in the right place at the right time. And then at about 12 minutes, we're entering best ever territory.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. That may have been like the birthplace of the concept of that of characterizing something as a bliss jam. I seriously like I think so. Like I mean, out of nowhere. Like, I think you can have other songs of theirs certainly have those moments, but they were just more structured and like I'm saying, like with like the Harry Hood, that is a part of the song, but and I think they kind of do it the next summer at at the
Yes.
Riverport Gen, which is it's longer, it's different because they open the show with it. They just get down to business. But, for a while I was very much like, no, Riverport Gen, stop talking about Riverport Gen, Went Gen. That's what you should only be talking about. I have listened to it a lot, and it feels like almost like a continuation, like it just like crept up in their consciousness yet again, like that night, and unleashed it a little bit more. But yeah, it's just I don't think there's been a piece of music that they've done that has ever been like that 9 minutes essentially that we're talking about, that 8 or 9 minutes that we're talking about, like minute six to like when they go into Uncle Pen. I don't think so.
Yeah, it's basically from 8 minutes or about 7 minutes to about 14 and a half, which is when Fishman starts playing the bluegrass on the snare drum, but everyone
Yeah,
else is
yeah,
still
yeah.
playing hard rock. And then at about 14 and a half, you can hear Trey count out the transition to Uncle Pen, which is a
Right.
little off, but it's nothing to criticize. It's just they were just going from soaring in the heavens to now they're back down to earth.
Yeah, and I remember being there and being so I couldn't I couldn't speak. Like it sounds kind of corny, but like I was just like, what just happened? And then everybody was freaking out about the Uncle Pen. Like they loved, like the Uncle Pen was extremely well received, right? And then to cap it off with the Art Jam, where we were talking about community earlier on, and how they made a piece of art with their community and passed it through the crowd and attached it. And then it was there for that one moment and then let it go, burned it. Amazing.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on Attendance Bias, sharing about Summer 97, sharing about 94, and most importantly, sharing in the groove the untold history of the 90s jam band explosion. Everyone listening, Mike and I talked for about an hour about it to start this episode. We didn't even touch on it. There's so much in there. If you're a big nerd like me, like Mike, I feel like there's 1,000 side streets you and I could have gone down, by the way. We talked about the
Totally.
book for an hour, could have been five. But anyone, you should go to your local independent bookstore if you can't find it, or DM Mike, as he said, he'll send you a signed copy. But it is essential reading for anyone, in my opinion, who appreciates what we have now in the 2020s to take it back 30 plus years to see kind of how, not how it all began, but at least where it blossomed. I'll put it that way. Thank you for coming on here and telling the story and for focusing on one of the best jams Fish has ever played.
Thanks. Appreciate it. It's been so fun.
And that's it for today's conversation with Mike Ayers, author of Sharing in the Groove. Now, Mike is a journalist and a writer by nature, so he didn't get a lot of facts wrong. I might have gotten one or two incorrect. So today's fact check is more like an IMDb trivia page than an actual fact check. Just the same, let's look it over.
Attendance bias fact check.
The episode of Attendance Bias that covers Halloween 1995, where Fish covered The Who's Quadrophenia in its entirety, aired on July 24th, 2024, with guest Jamie Bolt. Mike is correct that the Fish show at Darien Lake with the Merry Pranksters was August 14th, 1997, not 1993, as I mistakenly said. Even though I think I really knew that, I think that my neural pathways are automatically set to August 14th, 1993, when Fish played an all-time show at Tinley Park in Illinois. It was a highly traded tape, and it was eventually released as Live Fish 7. It's an essential show for any fan. The first dates of Fish and Widespread Panic taking turns opening for one another in the Northeast and the Southeast are during February 1990. Some of the shows feature Trey giving rhombus narrations and leaning heavily into the Gamehenge story, like on February 1st at the Georgia Theater. Unfortunately, other shows that are a little bit north of Georgia have no recordings available. When I tried to remember the burned CDs I received in the mail, I mixed up 2 dates and venues, but I tracked it down just for this fact check. So although Fish did play Chicago at the Allstate Arena in 2000, the poor-sounding CDs I received in the mail, when tape trading morphed into CD burning, was October 4th, 1999 at the Redbird Arena in Chicago. Coincidentally, the show featured a bust-out of Uncle Pen, played for the first time in 136 shows. And just out of curiosity, I checked the recording on fish.in. It's much better quality than the audience recording I remember on that CD. When Mike is describing his first show on April 8, 1994 at the Patriots Center at George Mason University, he mentions that a soccer team got on stage to lead a cheer. I jumped in with the phrase, "We win in our gym." I was confusing his show with April 23, 1993 at Cotterill Court at Colgate University. During that show at Colgate, Mimi Fishman, John's mother, played a vacuum solo during Lengthwise, while band members brought out signs that they found backstage that featured slogans such as, "We win in our gym," and "Winners play hard." At the George Mason show that Mike described, the band essentially stopped playing during Mike's song when the soccer team made up of about 10-year-olds came on stage to chant, "We are the Cougars," before Mike's song transitioned into Simple. Mike cites the Riverport Gin, the well-known version of bathtub gin that was played on July 29, 1998 at the Riverport Amphitheater in Missouri, as an example of a contender of best version of bathtub gin ever. I'll leave that up to you, but I'll also throw in the version from February 22nd, 2003 in Cincinnati for consideration as well. Just a recommendation of 3 amazing versions of bathtub gin. Toward the end of today's episode, Mike and I begin discussing whether or not a jam needs to be long to be considered great. He cites a couple of examples, so if you're a fan who needs to hear these huge long jams, 30 minutes plus, the ones mentioned are the famous Mud Island Tweezer from June 14th, 1995, and Runaway Jim from June 16th, 1995. That one lasts about 30 minutes. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Mike Ayers very much for joining me today, Fish.net for its help with the fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do, and Fish.in for the amazing recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You can leave a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You can follow Attendance Bias on social media, and you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.